Hey, welcome back to Real Dev, the show that keeps real developer knowledge alive. So I'm flying solo today, and we are going straight in. PHP gets a bad reputation, and some of the reputation is earned because of the patterns that have been passed down for over 20 years without anyone stopping to ask whether they are still good ideas or not. So let's correct some of that today. So we'll be talking about common mistakes PHP developers make. We know PHP powers a massive percentage of the web. I mean, like WordPress, Laravel, legacy enterprise systems. But it has a long history of being written badly. So there are the mistakes that creates security holes, slow applications, and code base that nobody wants to touch. So we will try to address these common mistakes and try to see how we can avoid them. The first one is using unsanitized user input in SQL queries. So when you have an statement like this, where we are getting the data from the user request and then passing it down. So this is a textbook SQL injection vulnerability. So ideally, you're supposed to use a prepared statement with PDO or MySQLi always. So it's not an exception, it's a must. It is not a suggestion. So, and the next one is displaying raw errors in production. So sometimes you forgot or you just deliberately do that because you want to see errors in production. And you use something like error reporting all and display errors equal to on in production. All of this shows the database names, the file paths, and the stack trace to anyone who triggers an error. So instead, you should log your errors to a file and never display them to the user on production. That's why it's ideal for you to have multiple environments. You can enable them in your dev, and then when you are done, you disable them for the production and maybe the staging environment too. The next one is using MD5 built-in method or SHA-1 function for password hashing. So these are not password hashing functions. They are checksums. What they are fast, which is the opposite of what you want. So ideal is you should use the password hash function with password bycrypt or password argon2 ID. This has been available since PHP 5.5. The next is not using sessions securely. So regenerating the session ID after login is not optional. It prevents session fixation attacks. So you should use something like session regenerate ID true after a successful login, and also set session cookie to HTTP only and secure. Next, we're talking about people or developers who actually mixing HTML and PHP logic in the same file for everything. Okay, it works for tiny scripts when you have just a mini script. Yeah, you could mix that. But if you actually use it in a large code base, then it creates an unmaintainable spaghetti code at scale. So ideally, you should separate your concerns even without a framework. You might be writing a vanilla PHP, but just make sure that there's a separation of concerns so that your data logic and your presentation should not be in the same place. And the next mistake or example is trusting the post, get, and cookie variables without validation. So when user input, so a user input is an untrusted input, right? So always you should validate the type, the length, the format. So ideally you want to use like the filter var for common patterns, and do not assume that because a hidden field says one, that it actually came from your form. It might be a malicious input. So you just have to make sure that you validate all these variables. And we also talk about using loose comparisons and not understanding the type juggling table. So PHP's double equal to is famous for its surprises, right? For example, we have the zero string is equal to false will always return true. And when you use PHP string is equal to zero, it used to be true in older PHP version. So ideally, you should use triple equal to when the type matters, right? So the PHP comparison table is a real document you should try to read once. And the next analogy we have is when we see when you're not using Composer for dependency management. sometimes people go over the internet or to the GitHubs and then they manually download libraries, copying files into their project. And whenever they need to update, they actually do that manually. They update them by hand. So you don't need all of this because Composer already solved this for you. So if you are writing a PHP and you are not a PHP project and you are not using Composer, then you are working harder than you need and you are creating a maintenance debt. And the next one is we've seen people trying to suppress errors, right? So suppressing errors is not an ideal situation. So if you think, okay, I can use the at operator to suppress errors, like in my file get content, I could suppress errors. So you're suppressing the error the function is supposed to throw, and you have no idea what went wrong. So you have to remove that at and handle the error properly. Use a try and catch. PHP gives you the ability to use a try and catch, and then you should be able to check the return value and be able to catch the exception as expected. And the next one is sometimes you just want to write and get done with it, right? So you're not using a type declaration in modern PHP. So PHP 7 clause down and then supports scalar type hints. So, and the return type. So for example, when you have a function, get user, the parameter should not just be ID, it should be int ID. So you should do a typecasting there that the ID must be an integer. So this is not an optional extra work. It makes your code self-documenting and it catches bug at the call time instead of somewhere deep into the execution. And the next one is we've seen people trying to maintain legacy and then you are running outdated PHP versions. So PHP versions like PHP 7.4 is at the end of life. So you need to upgrade down to PHP 8 the X, which introduce significant performance improvement and new features. If you are running old PHP in production, you are missing so many important security patches. So you have to check your PHP version and update it. That's why it's advisable for you to write a clean code and maintainable code so such that when you are updating, when you're performing a major update from versions like PHP 7 to PHP 8, yeah, some things will break. We've had some issues where optional parameters are declared before issues with optional parameters and required parameters and function calls. And that actually happens when you are performing a major change from 7 to 8. So if you have a clear code, it will be easier for you to perform this upgrade. So the next tip I'm going to give to you is just learn a modern framework. Maybe you learn something like Laravel, Symfony. Even if you write a vanilla PHP, you need to learn this framework because it's not because you need the framework, but because they show you how well structured PHP looks like. So if you're writing Laravel or Symfony, you'll be able to understand how you should write your vanilla PHP in a well-structured manner, and then it teaches you how to make your own code significantly better. So PHP, when PHP is done right, it's genuinely powerful. But when PHP is done wrong, it's a security incident waiting to happen. So these mistakes are avoidable, and you need to share this with a PHP dev, which you know. So you could drop a comment with the one that surprised you the most, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.